I am Selma Blanken. I'm now in the Netherlands, but I normally live in Granada. And I did research on the plastic sea for my master's in human geography with a specialization in migration and labor migration in agriculture. So I did my fieldwork there, and I met Ruth, and we started talking about the plastic sea, and we were aligned on many aspects and perspectives and how to encounter this subject. And since then, we started working together on an arts residency, and from there on, we developed a project in which we do emergent embodied research on the plastic sea, and we try to create kind of a platform for migrants and grassroots initiatives to socially mobilize themselves. And so we're working together.
Well, it's just going through my mind when I first met Ruth, and I think that sets the context where I was studying at Schumacher, a master's in holistic science at Schumacher College in the UK. And then I stayed on and had the experience of facilitating courses, and Ruth joined one of the courses I was facilitating. And from then on, we've been connected through our involvement in starting and sustaining initiatives that were inspired by the experience we had at Schumacher, but connected to different initiatives around the world. And we've been always in touch through that, but then more closely connected with more constancy since Ruth joined the research, and I also joined the research community. And I feel we've been very interested in each other's inquiries over this last couple of years.
So my name's Marie Brett. I'm a visual artist. I'm living and based in Ireland. I trained in London, spent quite a lot of time in Britain, and now I work across Britain, but mainly Ireland. My practice is, I've got a social arts practice, so I make works that very often involve collaboration with either different creatives and or especially with people who've got lived life experience that informs the work, and very often to do with trauma or some form of social human injustice. I make filmic work, I make installation events, quite often with performance, and I'm really interested in the legacy of a work, so how a work lives on beyond the moment in time that it's expressed in. I met Ruth through Patricia. Patricia saw one of my filmic works at an event we were both at. You were presenting at, I think, Patricia as well, or convened, and I presented a film-based work with another colleague, and talked to Patricia afterwards, formed a relationship in terms of, I suppose, the exciting opportunity to be a tiny part of the research and action community and share some work, which I've really enjoyed over a period of years. And then met Juliana and Ruth invited me then to, I suppose, be, as you'd call it, a mentor, in the sense of looking at the creative aspects and criticality of the development of your work from an artist, i.e. me being an artist, my perspective, and to input thinking in a freewheeling way. So that's my kind of connection.
So, and I'm Patricia, and I think possibly the course you're referring to, Juliana, is where I most got to know Ruth. I think I knew who she was before, so that was at Schumacher College, and it was in relation to an initiative that I was taking at the college, which I called Working Live. I was just very interested in offering a opportunity, an education opportunity for people across various master's courses to, sorry about the phone, it'll stop now, to learn about linking events that happen in what I view as in public, in a group situation, learning to attend to bodily as well as mental and emotional experience in such a way that you can make sense of it together, that might have traction and pertinence beyond, in whatever way you choose to communicate that. And I feel, so it's to me very interesting that that's where we first met. And Ruth wasn't even part of the course, but she said she really wanted to do it, and I made an exception. So there it all begins. What a good decision, a good judgment. And so I think since then I've known Ruth in visiting and mentoring a bit, or just being a friend and colleague for a number of different initiatives that you took in Spain, the Arolas project, and then the setting up of La Bolina, and of course then welcoming you into the research and action community, and being involved since then in the development of the particular inquiry that you're pursuing now.
Feels really significant that it's the 5 of you that are here. Selma, as a collaborator, someone who I've been working very, very closely with, and who's sort of seen the we've been, I guess, kind of co-creating this sort of way of researching that maybe we'll talk about later, this sense of ethnographic embodied research that is very extensive over many years, that's kind of culminated in these different expressions. And one of them is the performance piece that I shared. And then Juliana and Patricia, as both people who have known my practice over 10 years it was since this course that you were both referring to. And not only that, also took part as audience members in the experience recently in May. And then Marie, who's also been supporting over the last year and a half, I can't remember exactly how long, year and a half or so, in terms of supporting with the how to kind of I feel like my sessions with you kind of like slice through the work itself and kind of dip into really provocative questions that I wouldn't have seen. So there's that sense of really kind of taking things apart and kind of getting into almost the mechanics of how things work, but very much on an artistic, creative perspective. So it feels in a way like these, we each bring a different sort of strand, and I'm really interested for that to be present during this conversation.
When we came back the next day and met as a group, what was the most lively and stirred thing was the fact that people did feel unprepared for what Ruth calls the dropping of the fourth wall, to suddenly find that they were actually going to be in the performance. And in fact, that moment occurs with a choice. So the moment at which that happens, you receive a text which says, this person would now like to speak with you and would like to call you. Are you willing to speak with them? So there's a moment in which you can theoretically say, no, thanks.
The first moment where that passivity broke, but more mildly, was when we were asked to send a voice. So after receiving a text and then hearing a conversation from other people recorded,
Thank you. Yeah.
then also, then we were asked to send a voice recording of ourselves, introducing ourselves. So for me, that I remember in my body was the first moment where I felt like, okay, I'm in. There was someone who's gonna receive this. What do I say? And someone will be hearing this message on the other end.
Did people feel they were talking to an actor, or did they feel they were talking or sharing something that would then be transmitted to a person that had actually lived this experience?
So I think this was the biggest for me.
This is it.
More than the oh, now I'm in. I think a lot of people actually felt this hesitation about now I'm in, but felt interested. I think the biggest thing that the follow-up session that came was that in the session, I will speak for myself, but I only the coin only dropped in our follow-up session the next day. I realized that I wasn't talking to the real, that the names were fictional, let's say it this way, and they weren't the real people experience. So I hadn't realized at all.
Most people completely entered, were drawn into the performance to the extent that they felt they were themselves meeting a real other in a real context. But this is exactly getting to the, and I would say that was the most crucial discussion point, where people were most stirred, most affected, and where the whole questions, the more we explored them, they didn't get simpler. They didn't get, yeah. The more we explored that point, I would say the more stirred we became, and the less simple it came. There wasn't some easy, well, it would be best if we went through some of that. If you'd said this, or you could have said da, 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 da. But this exact question was probably...
I think then, just to add that for me, it didn't settle it, but it gave it some meaning, I suppose, or what is it serving, this stirringness. So this sense of being tricked, that was bodily alive, because of course no one thinks, oh, Ruth tricked me, but it's just that bodily sense that you feel. I think when Ruth also, when we spoke of how the issue that is being also, that is at hand with the workers at Maria, how this potential, like this very life, this possibility of being tricked, and can they trust the people and the contracts and the so this is part of the social of the issue that is being explored. So then something, I was very interested in having had this experience of being in a position where I was not sure, and later felt tricked, let's call it this way. And so then I was very interested in also, could this be part of the intentionally or not? So what are the layers of the intentionality? So that was something that I felt, once I looked through these lenses, I felt it became very interesting to have had that experience myself. That became part of the piece, but it was important for me to have looked through those lenses, that I was having an experience that the people that we are looking at, who are going through these issues, they are also experiencing that. So that's added rather than, but it was very, there was a lot in that conversation.
And Ruth and Selma, is that part of the work? Is that reveal, we'll call it, part of the work? Because in conventional terms, if it was an audience in a gallery or wherever it was, you'd have to create that very particular space that Patricia described, and that would inherently be part of the work. But because you were in that space as part of the research community, it naturally flowed into the reveal. But is that part of the work, that people then get into this, which I love, Juliana calls it, the being tricked, and is that to do with the blurring of the fiction and reality, or is it that blurring a different thing? So about you talk about that, is that a different thing you're referencing, or is it the fact it's an actor?
I think the fact that there's the whole experience happens in two sections, that there's this kind of the phone call that people would book in for to receive the performance experience that happens through WhatsApp, that they get instructions of what's going to happen, and they do that experience individually. And then the second part is that there'd be a group discussion. So I think this is always the format. I guess there is something that I feel that happens in me and I think it's still quite entangled, but there's something where I feel like it's interesting what happens. I think it's like that internal, this sense of being tricked, and also I think it detracts somewhat from the social issue that we're talking about. And so I was getting very frustrated with the and this is what I'd asked Bea to co-facilitate with me, one of the other members of the group, specifically to keep opening up the space for it not to get it's so attractive to speak of this, because it's something individual where we're talking about something around we get hooked on the mechanism of the performance itself and our relationship to the performance as an audience, and I think it's more attractive somehow to do that than to feel into the wider social issue, and it's part of it could be that it's part of the wider social issue, but it's it wasn't necessarily that it was designed to do that. We didn't set out thinking we're going to trick the audience so that they have this experience of what it is to feel tricked.
Anna spoke to this sense of that potentially my language could fold back into the work. You know, the idea of this deception, and the very thing that the narrative that I heard being spoken about was a deception. So it's like this kind of double entendre.
You know, it'd be great to hear you, Selma, what happens to you as being part of thinking about this in terms of what then happens unpredictably with the work. Because I feel like what you've just raised about this issue of defrauding, being defrauded, being tricked, it's not the obvious thing that I think of as the social issue in relation to the plastic sea. I think about a lot of rather ready-made thoughts in relation to the plastic sea, to do with, to do with abusive practices and the whole economic system and the way that it's set up, and a whole lot of things that in a way I'm programmed to think because they're in my milieu. And in a way, what the unpredictably, the action of this brought out was the nature of the loss of faith, good faith, trust, feeling defrauded within our relationships with one another in the economic realm, which I think actually is an extremely interesting thing to have triggered. Not the thing to think of as the social issue. So,
but they're both the same.
In this conversation, I'm thinking this is always if you really are interested in the difference between fabrication and action, this is when you got it. It's like, Sorry, go on.
I'd say, and they are the same. It is the social issue. It's just
maybe
maybe not so spoken about.
Yeah.
Potentially.
But I mean,
getting inside the experience of not looking at the problems, or also being touched by someone's story, which is also powerful. But there's something about getting inside the issue that I think for me makes it really interesting.
Yes.
I mean, I suppose for me, what tiny bit I've learned through you, Ruth, in the sense of why someone would end up in that environment doing that work, what their vision is, what their initial idea of what it would be was.
Yeah.
and that switch then to the reality of what it is. And God, I know just the tiniest bit, you know, you guys are experts in this, but that excites me in the sense of talking to that, because that's the really unspoken part that maybe you inadvertently did to the community, and got people right in the middle of it.
Yeah,
I mean, I feel it pervades it right the way through, from what makes people make the decision to migrate, like in the hope of what, you know, when they're offered work, in the hope of what, when it's like when they're offered a contract, in the hope of, it's like, and in a way they're defrauded at every step. And even I feel the defrauding is in the consumer in the supermarket, presented with a pile of cheap, beautiful oranges, like, is also defrauded, because they're, you know, it's like they're not what they seem. They're not what they seem. So I feel like the theme is deep. The theme is really deep.
I think it also speaks to this idea of help. You know, this, I think you mentioned it there, Juliana, this idea that what I'm not saying you said this, but this, what could be said of what can I do to help?
What can I do?
This idea of, you know, a hierarchy of I'm going to help this poor person, and this and all that goes with that. And the work then, when you made the reveal, tips that over. Of like, oh, I'm not in a superior position where I can offer help, or I can be a guardian angel, or I can be whatever people might hope to be and feel obliged to be. And then suddenly they're on the back foot themselves.
Dynamics shift.
Yes, it's
Selma was trying
yeah, Selma.
Yeah, I think it's so interesting to hear your experiences of something we didn't or intentionally designed to trigger, like that the being tricked in the end became the immersive experience. And therefore, indeed, like also shifting positionalities in the system. I think to link it back to the social issue, though, like the being tricked of the experience of the immersive experience to the being tricked in the wider picture of the plastic sea. It would be interesting to explore what to do to collectively link these experiences again. Also as a kind of aftercare of the group, of what has happened, the experience did provoke in people. And I also had to think of this experience of being tricked, breaking down the fourth wall, that it is in the plastic sea, it is a lot about invisibility and the invisibility of what is happening behind these beautiful shiny oranges or tomatoes in the supermarket. And it reminded me of what someone said, a migrant that was already 20 years working in this plastic sea and disillusioned completely with the system. And he was telling me that he was actually that he moved from the third world to the first world, but that he ended up in the fourth world. And he said, we have come from the third world and now have built the fourth world next to the first world. In the shanty towns of Níjar, Atochares, El Ejido, in Almeria's countryside, we have built a separate village, a nameless village full of replaceable workers. And I think this deception really links back into the being tricked, like having this shiny image of a better future, a brighter horizon, and ending up on under the plastic roofs of the plastic sea. So I would be also very interested in hearing your opinions on how do you think this experience of being tricked could be explored more in linking it back to the wider social and political issue.
Well, I think what's interesting, Selma, is I think clearly what I'm hearing, certainly I know it happened. Like for me, I feel that I went through the whole process of initial, the shock of just being taken aback, like when it happens when the reality you think you're in switches. So there's always this discombobulation, the ground moves under your feet, and I felt that. But I definitely recall that almost immediately after as I felt that, for me, the experience then became layer after layer after layer, and it's carrying on now, so that this conversation is another layer that is actually has left the possible performative bit that Marie was pointing to at the beginning, and has entered again a very real sense of, wow, yeah, this is how it affected me. And it affected me. I was also initially thought, oh, this whole thing has distracted us, potentially. And then the more I thought about it, the more I felt, no, it's actually got us to the heart of the matter. And as we talk now, I'm seeing that even more fully, that it gets to the heart in its own way. There's not one way to the heart of the matter. It gets to something very profound. And I feel like, how did this experience affect me months after? And I definitely think it affected me in the sense that it doesn't leave me when I find myself entering shops, entering supermarkets, talking with my neighbors. It never leaves me. The sense that I met this moment of, are we truthful with ourselves about what we're doing? I feel like it has led me to ask different questions at dinner parties, I mean, that don't look directly related to the plastic sea. But it's affected me more profoundly around this question of the fraudulent nature of the system in which we're operating, and what on earth do we do about that? Yeah, how do we? So I feel that it had quite a profound effect on me because of this issue. This issue.
I think that distinction for me is really important, because if people stay at a level where they're frustrated, not frustrated is not the right word, where they feel a sense of being tricked and an anger towards the performance itself, for me, then we've not done.
Yes, it's yeah.
What did you hope the fire would be afterwards? If the fire wasn't this bit, what were you thinking? What were you hoping for or anticipating?
I think what I imagined would happen was that afterwards people would say to each other, I spoke with the lawyer and she said that that cost 6,000, and then but Denver didn't have 6,000. So it would be more about the mechanics of the content of what was going on between, so that they would piece together something and be talking much more of the content. This is in my imagination what would have, but that didn't happen hardly at all.
So it's almost like you'd hope for layman's terms, you'd hope for the story to continue and be shared by all the different conversations, that narrative would continue to unfold and be built by the audience, in effect.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's interesting that, because I was thinking, what is that shift? I think the moment it became relational, then it wasn't so much give me more facts about this story. It opened the space for something else.
And it was exactly that issue, was what is the good faith of this relationship?
Yeah.
What are we in good faith with each other? That existential question is like, that's what became figural almost for everyone.
Yeah.
And I think that's a very profound, yeah.
And what would have been the difference for you personally when the characters would have been real? For real, like
No difference. It's like I spoke. It's like I spoke to someone I took to be the person I was speaking to. So I spoke completely, genuinely. I think this is what happens. I mean, anyway, I don't know what other people, but I spoke utterly genuinely to someone I thought was the person who'd been defrauded in the contract. If I'd known it to have been an actor, I suspect I would have had been conscious of I would have been less spontaneous. I would have been thinking through what I might say in a different way.
I don't know if it would work.
Sorry?
I don't know if it would work.
No. And the question didn't even arise in my mind.
Yeah, me neither.
I was completely in the performance. The performance had been beautifully set up. I was totally in it. I was immersed. And I took the person that I was speaking, and I felt it as an enormous privilege and shock and significant moment that I was speaking to someone who was having this experience over in Spain, for real. It was utterly real for me. And I was on what's the word? In that moment of what do I say? Who am I if this is this person?
And I suppose, Ruth, if you want to and Selma, if you want to recapture that in a work in the public realm, just being a devil's advocate, you'd have to really own that space, because if it was presented somewhere like you're saying, a festival, people go in, I would imagine, or propose with the expectation that they're dealing with actors, unless you really forefront it with all the research you've done, all the contacts you've gone, and you kind of beguile them into believing, like Patricia's just explained there, because of your both of your extensive research, people believe this is a person that is on the other end of the phone, has had this lived life experience. But if it's a performed piece in a theatre, unless you backstage that for them, they're not necessarily going to believe that. So then they might not be, as Juliana's saying, as honest, and as in my terms of what you're saying, as honest or as open with the conversation, because you might feel it's just contrived, and why would I want to get into this with the person? So I suppose it's like you'd have to really own that to then purposefully mislead people to get them into the space. And then once the reveal's made, that becomes part of the work I've proposed. And then what do you do with that?
I think it's extremely interesting to think about, because I was aware almost as soon as what you call the reveal happened, Ruth, I immediately remembered that you had consistently, pointedly, over and over again, told us that we were taking part in a performance. I just want to be clear about that. It was absolutely, I remembered immediately that all along you had told us it was a performance. Without hesitation. And Ju obviously had the same thing. But nevertheless, and I think it's really interesting that in the context of a research community and so forth, it's like once I was immersed in it, it's like something I became, this is your first question, it became real. And I also understood immediately as we began talking that it was real because you had created a performance that drew truthfully, I would like to bring that word in here, on actual experiences, actual facts, actual conditions that were in play. I feel like this question, so what do we mean by something being real?
Mm-hmm.
What is it for it to have been real? I mean, I felt it was a very real experience, taking part in the whole thing. And I was very glad to take part in this as well, because I think it goes on like real things do, it goes on affecting me.
I think there's another aspect that's really, that feels very kind of important to talk about in terms of this kind of the real and fiction, which is the who the four are who created the piece itself, because of the background of Ernesto and James, who have both really struggled getting their papers, who have both had the experience of working in agriculture in Spain, who have migrated to Spain, who know people who are living in these situations, although their situation is distinctly different. And it's important to say that that they have the experience of being able to have a foot in both, and that also Selma, who has worked alongside or shadowed for a time a lawyer. So the lawyer had these conversations with Selma, who was a researcher taking part, and we have this kind of very real experience of what these characters that aren't fabricated and played by actors, that they're played by people who have a foot in. And so this is also an interesting, for me, distinction.
Yeah. And I suppose that in turn then links back to the intention of the work. Like, what is your actual priority for the work in terms of where you place it and who it reaches and how it affects people? Because you're talking both about the process and the inherent rigor of making the work, and separately a potential wholly separate piece of work, and where the two overlap and what's made public about that or not. But beyond that, what do you want for the work? Because it seems like the work's got potential to be all sorts of things, like really excitingly, really powerfully. But what do you actually want for it?
I mean, in terms of the four of us, some of the conversations we've had is to be able to continue to try it out and learn about what the work does with different types of audiences. I think one next step is that we'll show it to a group that Selma's working with of university students who are interested in this field. So that will be another kind of testing, let's say, like it happened with the research and action community. But then we've spoken a lot about how this work, or we're interested also in reaching decision makers at various levels, that it also has the potential to be seen by audiences who wouldn't even consider themselves as audiences, let's say.
I had another question to you who had experienced the performance, like in the discussion of being tricked, would be the fact that if the characters would be the characters, would that have changed something in the aftermath of the piece, as it would not have triggered this feeling of being tricked? Or that Dembo would have been Dembo, and that you would have spoken to someone who was actually tricked, but had bought a fake contract and is working in a greenhouse.
I think it's very interesting, Selma, just try to answer briefly. As I'm thinking back, I'm thinking, well, I did think I was speaking to the person working, so that's what I thought. And I think there's an aspect of that which landed in me as an experience quite regardless of the second one. So I think that would have continued. I think it did continue. My sense of becoming implicated in speaking personally to someone who might indeed have been working, and my understanding of his situation and having made that contact, that would have continued into what I've talked about, and in my sense of needing to speak in relation to having met that person in my own milieu, for sure. Mm-hmm. The second one, the strong feelings activated around the issue of not being in good faith or being defrauded, I actually feel that has added a significant further and different layer to the whole thing, which is an even more profound issue, I think, in our society that lies underneath the particular ones. It's a deeper issue. So I actually feel that that has made the work richer and left me with more to think about than I would have already been left with. And it didn't undo anything of what I was originally left with.
Mhm.
Yeah, I don't think we have much time, but I think for me it's the same. I mean, the moment I was implicated, so I can't undo the experience of having been relationally engaged with that people. I don't, so that doesn't get undone. What happens is there's another layer added that is too strong for me to ignore.